I woke to the sound of my bedroom door creaking open. At first, I thought it was a dream, the kind where the shadows in the room take on a life of their own. But as I blinked, adjusting to the soft glow of moonlight filtering through the blinds, I saw him standing there, my teenage son, silhouetted in the doorway. "Mom," he said, his voice barely a whisper, yet heavy with something I couldn't place. My heart jumped. Was he hurt? Had something happened? "Are you okay?" I asked, sitting up. He hesitated, shifting his weight, his hand lingering on the doorframe. And then, with a trembling voice, he said something that turned my world upside down. "I saw Dad with someone else tonight." It was the kind of moment where time slows, every word like a ripple in a pond, distorting the world you thought you knew. I've always considered myself a devoted mother and wife. My husband, Daniel, and I had been married for 16 years. We met in college. He was the charming extrovert who could light up any room, and I was the quiet observer who found comfort in his easy confidence. Together, we built the life that, from the outside, seemed unshakable. We had one child, Evan, now 15. He was the kind of boy who was always tinkering with gadgets or lost in a book about space exploration. Quiet like me, but with his father's spark of curiosity. Our bond had always been strong. There was an unspoken understanding between us, as though we both shared a language no one else could quite decipher. Our home, a modest two-story house in a sleepy suburb, had always been a sanctuary. The walls were adorned with family photos, Evan's first steps, our vacations by the beach, the candid moments of laughter that felt too precious not to capture. The living room smelled faintly of lavender from the diffuser I kept running, and the kitchen was often filled with the scent of whatever comfort food I'd decided to make that week. But lately, something had felt off. Daniel had been coming home later than usual, his excuses vague: work meetings, traffic, or a last-minute dinner with a client. He'd always been a dedicated provider, but this new pattern left me unsettled. He was more distracted, his phone never far from his hand, and he avoided eye contact when I asked how his day had been. Stress, I told myself. It's just work stress. Evan had noticed it too. I could see it in the way he studied his father when he walked through the door, his brow furrowed as if trying to decode the shift in the air. He didn't say much, but then he never had to. I could read him as clearly as a book. The night Evan came into my room was unusually quiet. The house seemed to hum with an almost tangible stillness. The wind outside whispered through the trees, and the soft ticking of the clock on my nightstand was the only sound punctuating the silence. When he spoke those words, "I saw Dad with someone else tonight," it felt like the world stopped spinning. What do you mean?" I asked, my voice unsteady. "I was out with friends," he began, his hands fidgeting nervously. "We went to that diner on Main Street. I saw Dad there, with a woman. They were sitting close, and he was holding her hand. I felt a coldness settle in my chest, spreading outward like frost. Everything I thought I knew about my life, my marriage, and my family suddenly felt fragile, as if it could shatter at the slightest touch. The words hung in the air between us, heavy and unrelenting. My pulse thundered in my ears, drowning out the quiet of the room. Evan stood there, his shoulders slumped, a mixture of guilt and confusion etched across his face. "Are you sure it was him?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "Yes, Mom. It was Dad." He looked down at his hands, then back at me, his eyes shimmering with unshed tears. I didn't know what to do, so I came home. My mind raced. Who was she? How long had this been going on? Did I miss the signs? Or did I choose to ignore them? "Evan, come here." My voice wavered as I patted the bed beside me. He hesitated before sitting down, the bed dipping under his weight. "I'm so sorry," he whispered. I wrapped an arm around his shoulder, pulling him close. "You have nothing to be sorry for." But inside, I was crumbling. My son had seen something no child should ever have to witness, a fracture in the foundation of the family he thought was solid. And me? I was being pulled under by a tide of fear, anger, and a growing sense of betrayal. "Did they see you?" I asked. He shook his head. "No, I stayed outside. I didn't want to interrupt. I couldn't even believe what I was seeing. I nodded, trying to steady my breathing. You did the right thing by coming to me. For a moment, we sat in silence, the weight of the revelation pressing down on us. Evan's presence grounded me, but the questions clawed at my mind, demanding answers. When Evan finally went back to his room, I was left alone with my thoughts. Sleep was out of the question. I stared at the ceiling, the moonlight casting shadows that seemed to shift and morph, much like the reality I was now forced to confront. By the time Daniel came home, it was well past midnight. I heard the soft jingle of his keys, the creak of the front door, and his deliberate footsteps as he moved through the house, careful not to wake anyone. I waited until he stepped into our bedroom. "Late night?" I asked, keeping my voice calm. He froze, startled by my voice in the dark.
"Yeah."
Sorry, meetings ran long. The lie was so casual, so practiced, that it sent a fresh wave of anger coursing through me. "Where were you really, Daniel?" I asked, sitting up in bed. He hesitated, his hand still on the doorknob. "What do you mean?" "I mean, where were you tonight?" My voice was sharper now, cutting through the tension like a blade. His face flickered with something, panic, guilt, but he quickly masked it with annoyance. "I told you I had meetings." "Evan saw you," I said, each word deliberate and heavy. "He saw you at the diner with another woman." The blood drained from his face. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. The silence was deafening, his inability to refute the accusation a confirmation in itself. "You weren't even going to tell me, were you?" My voice cracked, the hurt bleeding through despite my efforts to stay composed. "Let me explain," he said, stepping closer. "Oh, please go ahead. Explain to me why my son had to come home tonight and tell me that his father, the man he looks up to, was out with another woman." My chest heaved with the effort to keep my emotions in check. "It's not what you think," he began, but the words felt hollow. "Then what is it, Daniel? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you've been lying to me, to your family." He ran a hand through his hair, his composure slipping. "I made a mistake. It wasn't planned. I don't even know what I was thinking." "Who is she?" I demanded. "A co-worker," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "It started a few months ago. It wasn't supposed to mean anything." My breath caught. "Wasn't supposed to? So it does mean something." He didn't answer, and his silence was more damning than any confession. I felt a deep aching. As he left, the door closing softly behind him, I collapsed onto the bed, tears spilling freely. The life I thought I knew had unraveled in a single night, and the pieces lay scattered around me, sharp and jagged. How could I ever put them back together? Crack in my chest, as if my heart itself was splintering. My mind screamed at me to push him further, to demand every sordid detail, but my body felt frozen, paralyzed by the weight of his betrayal. "I need time," I said finally, my voice trembling. "I can't do this right now. Evan saw you, Daniel. Do you even understand what that means? You didn't just betray me, you betrayed him, too." He nodded, his face pale. "I'll sleep in the guest room tonight." The following morning, the house was eerily quiet. Daniel had already left for work, his car missing from the driveway. I could hear Evan moving around in his room, but neither of us had the energy to face each other just yet. My heart felt heavy, as though I was carrying the weight of a secret I never wanted to uncover. By the time Evan came downstairs, I had made coffee and was staring blankly at the mug in front of me. His footsteps were hesitant, the floorboards creaking softly as he approached. "Morning, Mom," he said, his voice tentative. I looked up, offering a weak smile. "Morning, sweetheart. Did you sleep okay?" He shrugged, sitting across from me. "Not really." The silence between us was suffocating. I knew I couldn't shield him from the truth, not entirely, but I also didn't want to burden him with more than he could handle. "I talked to your dad last night," I began, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. Evan's gaze snapped to mine, his eyes searching my face. "What did he say?" I took a deep breath. He admitted it. He said he's been seeing someone from work. Evan's jaw tightened, his hands balling into fists on the table. How could he do that?
To you?
To us. I don't know, I admitted, my throat tightening. I don't have the answers right now, Evan. All I know is that it was wrong, and he hurt both of us. He looked away, his shoulders slumping. I always thought you two were perfect together. Like, no matter what, you'd always be okay. His words sliced through me. So did I whispered. For a moment, we sat in silence, the weight of the situation pressing down on us. But then Evan spoke, his voice trembling with a mix of anger and sadness. Last night, when I saw him with her, I almost went in there. I wanted to yell at him, to tell him he was ruining everything. But I couldn't. I didn't know if it would make things worse. Tears welled in my eyes as I reached across the table, taking his hand in mine. You did the right thing by coming to me. You shouldn't have to carry this alone. But now what? He asked, his voice cracking. Are you guys going to stay together? Are we going to be okay? The question hung in the air, and for the first time, I realized I didn't have an answer. My entire life felt like it was spinning out of control, and I had no idea how to stop it. I don't know yet, I admitted. But what I do know is that I love you. No matter what happens, that won't change. We'll figure this out together, okay? Evan nodded, his eyes brimming with tears. I just don't want to lose our family. His words broke me. I stood and pulled him into a hug, holding him tightly as he finally let his tears fall. We're still a family, I said, my voice firm. Even if things change, we'll always be a family. As I held him, a thought crept into my mind, something I hadn't been ready to admit before. This wasn't just about Daniel's betrayal. It was about how we moved forward, whether together or apart. The truth was, I couldn't fix what had happened overnight. But I could choose how to navigate the path ahead for both Evan and myself. Later that evening, when Daniel came home, I asked him to sit down. Evan was at a friend's house, giving us the space we needed for a conversation that had been a long time coming. I've been thinking all day, I began, my voice calm but firm. And I need to know the truth. Not just about her, but about us. Is there still an us? Daniel looked at me, his face etched with regret. I don't know, he said finally. I've made so many mistakes, and I don't even know how to fix them. I nodded, his honesty both painful and necessary. Neither do I. But one thing is clear, you hurt me, and you hurt Evan. And whether or not we can fix this, that's something you'll have to work to make right. The truth had been laid bare between us, raw and undeniable. For the first time, I felt the faintest glimmer of clarity. This wasn't just about a betrayal, it was about what came next. And while I didn't have all the answers, I knew one thing for certain. I wasn't going to let this define me or my son. We would move forward, no matter how uncertain the path ahead. The days that followed were heavy with uncertainty. Conversations with Daniel became practical and distant, focused on logistics rather than emotions. Evan and I grew closer in the way people sometimes do after surviving a storm together. He asked fewer questions as time passed, but his eyes still searched mine for reassurance that I couldn't always give. Daniel and I decided on counseling, not as a guarantee of reconciliation, but as a way to understand what had gone so wrong. For 16 years, I believed in a version of us that now felt incomplete, built on foundations I hadn't realized were so fragile. The sessions were raw, exposing wounds that neither of us had fully acknowledged before. But healing doesn't follow a straight line. Some days, I felt a flicker of hope that we could rebuild. Other days, the weight of his betrayal felt insurmountable. The trust we had once shared was gone, replaced by something brittle and tentative. Evan struggled too, though he tried to hide it. One night, as we sat on the couch watching a movie, he turned to me and said, "Do you think we'll ever be like we were before?" The question cut deep, but I forced myself to answer honestly. I don't know, Evan. Maybe not. But that doesn't mean we can't find something good again. It'll just look different. He nodded, his expression thoughtful. I guess different isn't always bad. As the weeks turned into months, I found myself reflecting more on what I wanted, not just for my marriage, but for myself. For years, I had poured everything into my family, often neglecting my own needs and desires. Daniel's betrayal was devastating, but it also forced me to confront parts of myself I had long ignored. In the end, there were no neat resolutions, no definitive answers. Daniel and I decided to take a break, giving each other the space to figure out what we truly wanted. It was terrifying and liberating all at once. Standing in the kitchen one evening, watching Evan work on a school project, I felt a flicker of something I hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. Not the kind that depends on someone else, but the kind that comes from within, a quiet, steady belief that no matter what happens, we'll find our way forward. Life doesn't always offer closure. Sometimes it gives you fragments to piece together, and you have to decide what kind of picture to create. For now, I was okay with the uncertainty. It was proof that we were still moving, still growing, still finding our way.